Hey everyone, how you doing? All right, so today I figured we'd do something a little bit different. I was going through, I got a new Bible version, so I was going through that. Just started over again at the Old Testament. Figured I would walk that through again. Um, so right now I'm in Judges, and I got to the part about Gideon, which oddly enough, I have a cat named Gideon. So I figured, why not? The story kind of spoke to me, so I figured we would do this a little bit different. I don't usually do it this way, but let me bring it over here. So hopefully, I'm probably going to butcher these names, so apologize up front. I'll just kind of read through this, do a little commentary. We're not going to go through the entire story and his son and all that, but we'll touch on a few things, and hopefully this won't take too long. I'll try to keep it around an hour, but we'll see how it goes. All right, so here we go. Chapter 6 here. Then the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord, so the Lord delivered them into the hand of Midian for 7 years, and the hand of Midian prevailed against Israel. So this is odd. It's kind of a recurring theme in the Bible. God saved them from Egypt, brought them out of exile, took them out of enslavement, showed them all kinds of miracles, plagues, did all this amazing stuff in the manna. It's pretty amazing. But people are people, right? We get forgetful. We forget blessings that have been bestowed upon us. And, we do what's essentially evil in the sight of the Lord, which is not obeying the commandments. God tells us what to do, and we're like, nope, don't feel like doing that. So they went their own way, essentially. So I don't know that God set, the Midianites against them. People are people, and they're sinful, and they like to steal and take things, and hurt people. But it appears as like God just took away their protection, was what happened. So it wasn't, I don't think God set them against them, but it says that God removed their protection, right? Delivered them into the hands, essentially just kind of like, like Pilate, right? Just kind of washing their hands like, all right, you want to go your own way, go for it. See how it works out. So they set them apart there and prevailed against Israel. Because of the Midianites, the children of Israel made for themselves the dens, the caves, and the strongholds, which are in the mountains. And when I was reading that, that's not common. Like, you don't do that unless you have to. So I guess they were just hiding out. And so it was whenever Israel had sown, the Midianites would come up. Also, the Amalekites and the people of the east would come up against them. So they had all these people in this region that really hated them. Land disputes, things of that nature. And God removed the protection, and they were kind of hiding in the caves and the mountains, and these people would come out and just thrash them, whenever they felt like it. Then they would encamp against them and destroy the produce of the earth as far as Gaza, and leave no sustenance for Israel, neither sheep nor ox nor donkey. So they were just ransacking the place and taking everything, which, to be honest, the Israelites did to a lot of people too in Canaan. So, depending on what side of this you're on, I'm sure everyone's got their own complaints. They broke into my house and stole everything. They broke into my house and stole everything. So, it kind of goes back and forth. But we're just going through the scripture here. For when they would come up with their livestock and their tents, coming in as numerous as locusts, both they and their camels were without number, and they would enter the land to destroy it. So they were coming in there, no good intentions. They were going to destroy everything and steal everything. You'll see it in the Bible over and over. They come in to utterly destroy everything. Typically, you'll see it a lot. They would come in, they would kill all the males. They would keep maybe the females that were still intact, as they call it, like still virgins. So they would steal the virgin girls, typically kill the men, kill the children, except for the virgin girls. I think they were the only ones that were pretty much exempt for reasons. So these were very rough times to live in. And so Israel was greatly impoverished because of the Midianites, and the children of Israel cried out to the Lord. That's a common thing in the Bible. God saves them. God brings them up out of Egypt, uses plagues and uses blessings and a combination, right? The whole biblical story. But still, just like when Moses went up on the mountain, got the 10 Commandments and came down, by the time he came down the first time, they had already turned back to their own gods and, the gods they made with their hands. They took all the gold, made like a golden calf. And that's after they had already been rescued from Egypt, and they complained the whole time because they didn't have enough food, and they didn't like the manna, and they just, they're griping and grumbling, stiff-necked, I think is the term. So even after all that, After all the plagues and everything they saw and all the blessings that were bestowed upon them and kept them alive and all of that, right? Even even after seeing all of that, still they're kind of complaining, you know? So that's the story. And then they cry out. So they disobey God, they get punished, and then they kind of reconcile with God. They go back and say, "Hey God, I'm sorry," and they get back into that covenant relationship. That's typically how it goes. And it came to pass when the children of Israel cried out to the Lord because of the Midianites, that the Lord sent a prophet to the children of Israel and said to them, "Thus says the Lord of God of Israel, I brought you up out from Egypt and brought you out of the house of bondage," right, where they were slaves. "And I delivered you out of the hand of the Egyptians and out of the hand of all who oppressed you, and drove them out before you and gave you their land." Depending on what side of that equation you're on, you may or may not agree with that. It's hard to give you land that belongs to someone else. The other day I used the example of China. Just an example. It's a big country. They got a lot of people. So something like that, right? Let's say that God says, "Oh, okay, well, China, you can have that. That's your land. That's your inheritance." Well, it's not quite that easy. Even if they're not like a Christian nation or back in this time, right? They weren't godly people. The God of Israel, as they called them. So even then, like, it depends on what side of that you're on. Because if you're in China and God says, "Hey, this is your inheritance, go get it," and you go in there and start killing everybody, right? And you kill all the men and you take the virgin females and you can understand how, depending on what side of that equation you're on, you may or may not like it. And it's horrific. And no, we shouldn't do that. But this is the Bible. This was different, written in a different time period. So I'm trying to give you like a contemporary example. But that's essentially what happened. So this is like their reconciliation. And God sent him a prophet and said, "Hey, I brought you up out of Egypt. I took care of you, and you went your own way. So, but you have not obeyed my voice." Essentially, that's it, right? I told you what to do. You didn't listen, and now you're going to get spanked. It's the same thing that happened to him when Moses came down off the mountain with the 10 Commandments. They were running around. I think they ended up killing like 3,000 people because of that. So God can be a bit harsh, apparently. So let's see. And then we got Gideon here. And like I said, oddly enough, I hate to always talk about the cats. My cat's named Gideon. I didn't pick his name because of this. It's odd. Interesting. But whatever. I figured that was a sign, so I figured I'd talk about it. And I like the story. I read the story. I like this one. I've read it before, but you know how it is when you read it again, fresh ears. So now the angel of the Lord came and sat under the terebinth tree, which was in Ophrah, which belonged to Joash the Abizar. I'm going to butcher these pronunciations. I totally apologize. Don't know how to pronounce them. Abizrite, while his son Gideon threshed wheat in the winepress in order to hide it from the Midianites. So he's in there hiding, threshing wheat in the winepress, I guess because he's worried they're going to run in there and steal everything, which is kind of what they do. And like I said, depending on what side of the equation you're on, they both have that argument, right? He stole from me, I steal from him. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. You never stop fighting. You just kill everyone on both sides. So the angel of the Lord is kind of crazy. He's sitting there like threshing wheat, hiding from these people. And then the angel of the Lord appears to him and says, "The Lord is with you, you mighty man of valor." This guy's just sitting there like threshing wheat in a wine press. Can you imagine how strange that would have been? He just shows up like, "Oh, hey, what's up?" Weird. So then Gideon says to him, "Oh, my Lord, if the Lord is with us, why then has all this happened to us? And where are all his miracles which our fathers told us about, saying, 'Did not the Lord bring you up out of Egypt?' But now the Lord has forsaken us and delivered us into the hand of the Midianites." But they already explained why that happened, right? They sent the prophet to tell them, like, you guys turned away from God. You didn't listen. God sends people to talk to you and give you the rules of the road, and you don't listen. You go your own way, you do your own thing, and then you get spanked. Maybe God doesn't do it intentionally, but God kind of like removes the protection, and then people just become people and do what they do, especially in these times. Very rough. It's like feast or famine. They just steal from whoever they want, take whatever they want, kill whoever they want, like acting like lawless savages, basically, right? The law of God's not written on their heart, so they become God in their own eyes, and they do whatever they feel is right. Whatever makes you feel good, it's good, I guess. That's how they saw it, which is not true. And that has very long lasting impacts that are not good. You'll not enjoy them. So he said to him, Midianites having a, yeah, here we go. And the Lord turned to him and said, go in this might of yours, and you shall save Israel from the hand of the Midianites. Have I not sent you? Which is odd because he just showed up. This guy had no idea, right? This guy's just sitting there threshing wheat. Then the angel of the Lord shows up, and he's like, hey, I'm going to be with you. Have I not sent you? He just met the guy. Can you imagine how strange this would have been? Especially like they're being oppressed, and he's explaining how the Israelites are upset because, where are these miracles we keep hearing about? This guy's heard all these stories, right? He's not seeing it. They're getting oppressed. So they think they've been left alone. And he says to him, oh, my Lord, how can I save Israel? Indeed, my clan is the weakest in Manasseh, and I am the least in my father's house. So very strange who God picks. This guy, his clan is the weakest in Manasseh. And not only that, he's in the weakest clan, and he's the least in his father's house. So this guy does not plan to get picked. He did not have this on his bingo card. And then this angel of the Lord shows up and tells him all this, and he's the least in his father's house, and he's of the weakest clan. And he's telling him he's going to save him. And this guy hasn't seen any miracles yet. That's what he says, right? And the Lord said to him, surely I will be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man. What? I read in here, it was like, I think he ended up, they killed like an army of like 135,000 men. 135,000. These people are ransacking this guy's village all the time, stealing everything, killing everything. So they're getting utterly destroyed by these people, and they're in their lands, right? So they're completely outnumbered. They're getting just thrashed all over the place. This guy's hiding in a wine press, crushing wheat. And then the angel of the Lord shows up and says, hey, you're the guy. You're going to take care of this for me. He said, surely I'll be with you, and you shall defeat the Midianites as one man. He tells him as one person he's going to get this done somehow. You can imagine how this guy Gideon must have felt like this guy's crazy. It doesn't make any sense. And he says to him, if now I have found favor in your sight, then show me a sign that it is you who talk to me. Okay, this is Gideon. Do not depart from here, I pray, until I come to you and bring out my offering and set it before you. And he said, I'll wait until you come back. Okay, here we go. This animal sacrifice thing is garbage. But it's in the Bible. It was customary at the time, so that's why they did it. This goes back to like blood sacrifice, and it's no good. So Gideon went in and prepared a young goat and unleavened bread from an ephah of flour. The meat he put in the basket, and he put the broth in a pot, and he brought them out to him under the terebinth tree and presented them. And the angel of God said to him, take the meat and the unleavened bread and lay them on this rock and pour out the broth. So here's this guy he just met, angel of the Lord. It doesn't really say how he knows that. So I don't know if the guy had like a radiance on him or it's like an outfit he had. I'm not sure how he knew it, but somehow he knew it. They don't really state like how he knew that. But he tells them, take out these, customary at the time, they took out this poor young goat. So they got this goat there, they got the flour. He tells them to lay it on the rock and then pour out the broth. So it's almost like this offering on this rock. And he did so. And then the angel of the Lord put into the staff. Oh, I even got a little prop for you guys this time. Look at this. Got this in Tennessee. Huh? So, a little Tennessee walking stick. So, let's see here. Now it came to pass, peace be upon you, the Lord. Yeah. Put the end of his staff that was in his hand, this guy he just met, angel of the Lord, doesn't say how he knows it, touched the meat and the unleavened bread, and fire rose out of the rock and consumed the meat and the unleavened bread. And the angel of the Lord departed out of sight. Huh? How cool is that? So he's sitting there. Just met this guy. He tells him somehow he's going to go kill 135,000 seasoned soldiers who have been absolutely destroying all of his people. They're camped all around him. They steal everything. They kill everything. He shows up and says, you're my guy. You're going to go kill all 135,000 of these people. Somehow. Doesn't really explain how it's going to happen. And then he puts this young goat out there, which is ridiculous, but it is their custom. He puts the goat out there in the flour, puts the broth out there on the rock. Angel of the Lord's like, boom, hits it. Fireball comes out. Just crazy. fireball comes out, burns it all up, right? And yeah, that's it. And then he departs. He's just like disappears. Hits it, right? Hits it, fireball, guy disappears. So, I mean, at that point, that proves who it was, right? Angel of the Lord. For sure, that proves that the guy can disappear, which is quite strange. But it seemed like Gideon had already accepted that before he even got to this part. It seems like he'd already, and it doesn't say how he knew that, but somehow he knew. So, okay. So there, it's confirmed at this point. And now Gideon perceived that he was the angel of the Lord. Well, yeah. Yeah. If he's got a staff and he's hitting rocks and you got fireballs and then everything disappears, including the person, I'd say that's definitive evidence. I would go with it. Perceived he was the angel of the Lord. So Gideon said, "Alas, O Lord, for I've seen the angel of the Lord face to face." Pretty cool, right? He's from the least tribe, and he's the least of his father's house. This guy shows up with a staff in his hand. I guess he said he was the angel of the Lord. You put down this offering, he hits it, fireball, it's gone, he's gone. That's an amazing story up to this point. I mean, if nothing else happened, that's something you'll never forget. It's a pretty cool Bible story. And the Lord said to him, "Peace be with you. Do not fear. You shall not die." Which sounds amazing because you're about to go up against 135,000 seasoned soldiers who want nothing more than to kill you and take all of your stuff. So Gideon built an altar there to the Lord and called it "The Lord is Peace." To this day, it is still an opera of the Abiezrites. I know the pronunciation's rough. Now it came to pass the same night that the Lord said to him, "Take your father's young bull, the second bull of 7 years old, and tear down the altar of Baal that your father has, and cut down the wooden image that is beside it." Right. So they had all kinds of strange gods they worshiped. Baal was one. Moloch was another one. I think some of them they like offer children to. It's a sacrifice thing. It's a sacrificial blood cult. Kind of what it is. They sacrifice people, animals, everything but themselves typically. So here we go. Take your father's bull, second bull, 7 years old, tear down the altar of Baal, which is good, right? What would God want you to do, or the angel of the Lord? To destroy things that are anti-God, which Baal would be one of them. Cut down the wooden image that's beside it and build an altar to the Lord, your God, on top of this rock in the proper arrangement. And take the second bull off burnt sacrifice, and the wood of the image you shall cut down. So Gideon took 10 men, which is interesting because the angel of the Lord told him he would do it by himself. But then I guess on his own he decided to take 10 men. Was that not following the instructions? I guess so. But at the same time, Gideon's a human being. And I mean, this is already a stretch for him. The least tribe, the least person in his father's house. He's sitting in a wine press threshing wheat, right? And this guy shows up with a staff and is setting things on fire and disappearing. So he did it. He followed the directions mostly. But the Lord told him to do it on his own, and instead he took 10 men. Maybe the angel of the Lord knew he was going to take 10 men. I don't know. But that's what he did. But he was trying to comply. So he took the 10 men among his servants and did as the Lord had told him. But because he feared his father's household and the men of his city too much to do it by day, he did it by night. I'm sure you're going to have people argue that, the Lord was behind him and he shouldn't have feared anything. He should have just run in there just by himself and taken it all, without taking the other men with him and without doing it at night. I guess you could say that, but, that's for someone who's like a seasoned veteran who's been, walking with God for a very long time and trusts God completely, right? This guy was just threshing wheat, hiding out from people that were killing him. There's 135,000 of them. And this guy shows up and sets things on fire and disappears, right? Says he's the angel of the Lord. And he's in disbelief. He hasn't seen the miracles in a long time. So he took 10 men and he did it by night. He stretched it a little bit, but he still got it done. So Gideon destroys the altar of Baal. And when the men of the city arose early in the morning, there was the altar of Baal torn down, and the wooden image that beside it was cut down. And the second bull was being offered on the altar, which had been built. This is disgusting. So they said to one another, "Who has done this thing?" And when they had inquired and asked, they said, "Gideon, the son of Joash, has done this thing." So somehow they knew it was him. I'm not sure how. Then the men of the city said to Joash, "Bring your son out, for he may die." See, this is ridiculous. So they're worshiping a false god. Angel of the Lord sends Gideon to go take it down. Their first response after their fake god their fake god structure, I guess you would call it, is taken down, is that bring out your son, we want to kill him. These are very violent times, extremely violent times, and this is kind of how people operated. They're like savages, right? You tore down a structure to a fake god or demon or whatever you would like to say that they were worshiping, and their first instinct is, we'd like to kill your son, so bring him out here so we can kill him. That's the kind of savagery that was going on during these times. And because he had torn down the altar of Baal and because he had cut down the wooden image that was beside it. So what? But Joash said to all who stood against him, "Would you plead for Baal? Would you save him? Let the one who would plead for him be put to death by this morning." Again, this terrible punishment. You can't just kill people like this. It's crazy. Especially like by this time, like they already had the 10 Commandments, so I guess no one really paid attention to them. If he is God, let him plead for himself because his altar has been torn down. So essentially, if it's God, let God take care of his own business. If he can't handle his altar being torn down, he's not really a God anyway. Therefore, on that day, they called him Jerubbaal, saying, "Let Baal plead against him because he has torn down this altar." Jerubbaal, yeah, pronunciation, sorry. Yeah, maybe just as an aside, right? To Bible Gateway, maybe you should put like a little speaker icon next to that, and you can click it, and it'll pronounce it for you. That would be helpful. Just throwing it out there. Not that it really matters, but, just to be accurate, I guess. Then all the Midianites and Amalekites, the people of the east, gathered together, and they crossed over and encamped in the valley of Jezreel. But the Spirit of the Lord came upon Gideon. Then he blew the trumpet, and the Abiezrites gathered behind him. And he sent messengers throughout all Manasseh, who also gathered behind him. He also sent messengers to Asher, Zebulun, and Naphtali, and they came up to meet him. So he had seen the angel of the Lord. He'd seen the miracle that he performed, the disappearing act. But at this point, this is where the Spirit of the Lord came upon him. And that's when he blew the trumpet and gathered all these people together. So up to this point, the Spirit wasn't on him. He was following God's commands up to this point. A few alterations, still got the job done. He said do it as a single man. Granted, he gathered 10 people and did it at night. So, a little finagling here and there, but he got it done. And this is when the Spirit came upon him. So it wasn't until this point that it actually happened. And it doesn't really say like how he knew it or anything like that, but I guess he got the power, he got the juice. And that's when he blew the trumpet and all these people showed up. And then here's another complaint about Gideon about how he doesn't believe. I mean, he does, but he keeps testing God. He's like, well, I know you did the thing with the rock and that was cool and all, but I don't really know if that's you. And keep in mind, the strange thing is, this is after the Spirit came upon him. All right. So he took this, right? He took the staff, hit the rock, fireball, everything disappeared. The guy disappeared. Right. So that should have been the end of the story. And then he does what God tells him, what the angel of the Lord tells him to do. And he destroys the structure. The Spirit comes upon him. And then after all that, so all that's happened. And the Spirit came upon him. It doesn't even say how he knows it, but I'm sure it was quite impactful. And he probably knows what that means. So then you have this part, which is strange. So Gideon said to God, "If you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said," right, as a single man, as he told him, "look, I shall put out a fleece of wool on the threshing floor. If there's dew on the fleece only, and it is dry all on the ground, then I shall know that you will save Israel by my hand, as you have said." So he wants another sign. He wants to test him again, just to confirm it, as if the Spirit coming upon you and what he did with the rock wasn't enough. Not to mention, he already knew it was the angel of the Lord before that happened, before the thing with the offering. Doesn't say how he knew it, but somehow he knew. When he rose early the next morning and squeezed the fleece together, he wrung the dew out of the fleece, a bowl full of water. So the fleece had all kinds of water in it, moisture. And then Gideon said to God, "Do not be angry with me, but let me speak just once more. Let me test, I pray, just once more with the fleece. Let it now be dry only on the fleece, but on the ground let there be dew." And God did so that night. It was dry on the fleece only, but there was dew all over the ground. So he tested him twice, right? Spirit came upon him. He saw the angel of the Lord. He did the sacrifice. It disappeared. That wasn't enough. He went and destroyed the statue of Baal, which he told him to do. He didn't get killed. Then he wants to test him again. So he tests him 2 more times. Once with the fleece, it was wet, and once that it was dry. Both times, it was affirmative. So now he's confirmed, the story he told him was correct, and he's going to save Israel, save his people. Gideon's valiant 300. Yeah, this is wild the way this goes down. Now, granted, he initially told him it was just going to be one person. So let's see. Then Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them by the hill of Morah in the valley. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. Now therefore proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. So, as if it wasn't bad enough. And this is strange, because like I said, initially he told me it would just be one man, but maybe that's not what he meant. Maybe he meant like one man as leader with a group of people. That makes more sense. So maybe that's what he meant. The people who are with you are too many for me to give Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself instead of God. So essentially, they're going up against 135,000 people. Gideon, this guy that is the least of his family, he's from the least tribe, right? No one expects this guy to be a leader of anything, much less an army. He was in there hiding like, threshing wheat. So somehow he manages to get these 32,000 people together. And then the angel of the Lord, and then the Lord himself. Okay, so the Lord said to him, you got too many. Basically, God said, this is going to be too easy. You've got 32,000 against 135,000. This is going to be too easy. And if you win, you'll say it was because of your own might, which is ridiculous. Because 32,000 against 135,000, in the way that they fought back in these days, you're not talking about satellites, right? Satellites and sonic weapons and laser-guided munitions and things like that. No. No. You're not talking about that. This is like hand-to-hand combat, right? Swords, shields, fisticuffs. This is not the same kind of arrows, right? They had arrows too. So 135,000 against 32,000, you're going to lose pretty much every single time. There's no possible way you could win that. I mean, strategy aside, I don't care. You've just got a mass of people. You could just take 135,000 and just kind of throw them out around a circular pattern and just go in there and wreck everything. So God tells him, you got too many people. It's going to be too easy with 32,000. So he tells him, it's anyone who's scared or fearful, just let them go home. So 22,000 people turned around and left, and I don't blame them. You show up to this with a sword and a shield, maybe an arrow and a bow, maybe like a little dagger, and they say, we're going to go up against these people that have been routing you for the longest time, right? They've been kicking your butt for at least 7 years now. And I want you to go up against them, 32,000 against 135,000. People aren't stupid. They understand your odds are terrible and you're going to die. So 22,000 of them go home. They're like, I'm out. I'm not doing this. Especially with this guy as the leader. This guy from the least tribe and the least of his family? No, thank you. No. So he's down to 10,000 people. 10,000 remain. These are some brave people. If you thought 32,000, you're not brave like that, and then there's only 10,000 people against 135,000, you're guaranteed to lose. You're going to die. It's not going to end well. But the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Then it will be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you, and of whomever I say to you. So take him down here, and I'm going to test him. This one shall not go with you, the same shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps on the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink, and the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. But all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink water. Crazy. Like only God would know this. would know who was going to lean down there and drink water like a dog, which is very strange to use that as criteria for being a soldier. But God knows things we don't know. So of these 10,000, I guess only 300 went down there and lapped it like a dog out of the water and didn't get on their knees. And the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped, I will save you and deliver the Midianites into your hands. Let all the other people go, every man to his place. So the people took provisions of their trumpets in their hands, and he sent away all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley. Least of his tribe, or least of the tribes, least of his house, shows up with this crazy story how an angel showed up. Angel of the Lord showed up, right? Took the offering, disappeared, tested him a couple times. So this is probably what he's telling these people. They show up 32,000 people against 135,000. These people have been kicking their butts. You send 22,000 of them home. They leave because they're scared. Of 10,000 men, you only keep 300 because they drink water like a dog? What? No, I'm going home. I'm not staying with this crazy army. That doesn't make any sense at all. None. But that's what God told him. So that's what he did. Can you imagine this? What if you're one of these 300? Like, do you feel good about this battle? You think you're going to make it out of this okay? I don't think so. And it happened on the same night the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But if you're afraid to go down to the camp with Purah your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hand shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. So he's sneaking down there to go check on him. And God told him to. Then he went down with Purah his servant to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Now the Midianites and the Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seashore in multitude. Completely outnumbered. It said 135,000 when I looked on Google, so hopefully that's right. Completely outnumbered. They would have been outnumbered at 32,000, like 32 to 135, completely outnumbered. You're going to die. All right, these people knew how to fight. So then he whittles it down to 10,000, which is even more ridiculous. And then because of a drinking water like a dog test from God, somehow you whittle it down to 300 people and you think that's going to be enough. So this is an absolute suicide mission. You're all going to die. That has to be what they're thinking, right? Aside from the provision from God that says you'll be fine, other than that, everything else in the world says you're going to die badly. It's not even a battle. It's not even a fight. This is suicide. This is suicide by war, I guess you'd call it. And when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. This when he snuck down there. And he said, I had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell down and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Weird dreams, right? They say dreams don't mean anything. I don't believe that. I've had some visions, last dreams, and they definitely had messages to them. They're odd, right? Like this is odd. You have to kind of read into it a bit, use discernment. But that's what they heard. Then his companion answered him and said, this is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. So that's odd. That's good news for him, considering it's 300 against 135,000, and he just happens to walk down there, and he just happens to overhear this conversation. Come on now. You can't tell me that wasn't set up. So he's got to be feeling pretty good at this point. And so it was when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation that he worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, put a trumpet into every man's hand, with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. And he said to them, look at me, and do likewise. Watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. That is insanity. And it has to be a God story, because if you were going to fake in a story, You wouldn't make it this stupid. This story is ridiculous. So if you were going to fake a story about how God helps you, you wouldn't write this story. It doesn't make any sense. No one's going to believe it. It's outrageous. Absolutely outrageous. So he sneaks down there, he hears them, and they say, yeah. You know, it tells them the dream about the bread hitting the tents, and he said, yeah, that's Gideon, and, you know, they're going to take the camp and just destroy everybody. And then he divides his little 300-person crew, his little fighting force of 300, into 3 groups of 100. So you're about to go into certain death. Anyone who's in the military, imagine the technology of this time. Not today. There's no satellites, there's no GPS, there's no missiles, and all the cool stuff they have today. They don't have all that. This is hand-to-hand combat with a sword and a shield, maybe a bow and an arrow. He sends you in there, 300 against 135,000. You're going to die. It's guaranteed death. And he gives you a trumpet. No, thank you. I want at least a sword. I want a shield. I want a bow on my back, some daggers. I want to have a chance. Give me something I can fight with. I don't need an empty pitcher with a torch inside. And I don't need a trumpet. I'm not going to entertain them. I'm not going to be juggling things and entertaining them and blowing trumpets, okay? I want some weapons. And he gives these men a trumpet and an empty pitcher and torches inside the pitcher. Just imagine this. You're one of these 300. You're sitting there with this guy you don't know, right? The least of his house, the least of the tribes. No one really knows this guy. Got this story about the angel of the Lord coming to him. Somehow, the Spirit comes upon him. He rouses up all these people. He finally gets a force of 32,000, right? He lets 22,000 of them go home because it would be too easy. He lets them go home. Says, God doesn't want them. They're scared. You get it down to 10,000. Then he gives a test where he gets them all to get water by this pond or whatever. And they're drinking water like a dog. And he's like, those are my guys. So he takes 300. He had 32,000. He takes 300 to go up against 135,000. This story is ridiculous. If you were going to make up a story about how God helped you, you would not make up this story. Because it's so crazy, no one would believe it. But that's probably why it was done that way. And he tells them, so here's their trumpets and your pitchers and your torches. This is how you're going to win. Somehow, this is how you're going to win. The sword of the Lord of Gideon. Crazy. So Gideon and the 300 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch. Just as they had posted the watch, and they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands. So torches over here, they got the trumpets here, and for blowing. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and Gideon, smashing these things with the torches and blowing the trumpets. This had to look ridiculous. Can you imagine this? I'm sitting there with 135,000 of my fellow soldiers, and here come these 300 dudes blowing trumpets and running around with jars with torches in them and smashing them. This makes no sense at all. It's crazy. And every man stood in his place all around the camp, and the whole army ran and cried out and fled. When the 300 men blew the trumpets, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. And the army fled to Beth Acacia, towards Zerira, as far as the border of Abel Mahala by Tabith. Yeah, I don't know what those pronunciations, but so that's how God intended to do it. It wasn't actually with the weapons, which is why they took the trumpets and the jars and the torches. God never intended for them to fight. And the whole army ran and cried out and fled. Yeah, every man stood in the whole army blew their trumpets. The Lord set every man's sword against his companion. So basically, God drove them all crazy. And they all attacked each other. So God manipulated the minds of the 135 soldiers. And instead of fighting these people who came in, literally drove them crazy. and they started killing themselves, which is effective. So I guess God never intended for Gideon and his people to do anything, which would explain why you only needed 300. Something with the trumpets, drove them crazy. And they kind of killed each other, like attacked each other. Set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp, and the army fled. And the men of Israel gathered from Naphtali, Asher, and all of Manasseh and pursue the Midianites. So they didn't all die. But they went into this massive state of confusion and started attacking themselves. They just went crazy. They lost it. The God infiltrated their minds and turned them against themselves. What an amazing story. And then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, "Come down against the Midianites and seize from them the watering places as far as Bethbara and the Jordan." Then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places. Okay, captured 2 princes. They killed. Yeah, see all this murder is no good. But that's all that was going on back then. It was. The Old Testament was written in blood. Might as well have been. Killed at the winepress. They pursued. I won't take it any further. I think that's okay for now. Maybe later I'll do the rest of the story about his son, which is just terrible. And then there's a part about him getting, I guess he made a, what do they call it? Epa or whatever it was, like a little thing on his chest, and got a little too big for his britches, and his son and the concubine. So I'll do that one maybe later. I'll try to keep this one short, but that's insane, isn't it? Like, that's a God story right there. He hadn't seen miracles in a long time. Didn't sound like he really believed at all. And the angel of the Lord shows up. He's got his staff, does the miracle for him, even entertains him, right? He doesn't believe it. So he then does 2 more signs for him, right? With the fleece, with the wool or whatever. One time it's wet, the other time it isn't. So he's proven himself a few times. Granted, he didn't believe 100%, but he still followed through with it. He's a human being, right? He's a human being trying to understand divine truths and divine obedience. For a human being, that is not easy. We grew up in this physical world and we think that, physics is everything and that's all there is to it. And that's not the case. So, Gideon's trying to grapple with that fact. So even though the angel of the Lord did miracles and explained it to him, he's still even if God's on your side, it doesn't make sense. Why would you gather 32,000 people, which he probably thought was impossible because no one knows this guy, aside from the fact that he destroyed the Baal statues. Other than that, they hardly know this guy. And he rouses an army. He doesn't sound like a general. This is not a guy you would pick to run an army. He's not built for it. Least of his house, least tribe. This is not who you would pick. The world would not look at this guy and be like, that's a military leader. That's our guy. It would never happen. He doesn't fit the mold. But God saw something that we don't see, right? Not to mention, God also intended for it never to turn into an all-out, drag-out fight. Technically it was because they chased him, and you keep reading. There's more that goes on there, and they capture the kings. But the initial fight, the 300 against 135,000, that is impossible. But the whole time, I guess God was just testing his obedience because he knew he was going to set the soldiers against themselves anyway, which is why he sent them down there with their ridiculous outfit, the armament of a trumpet and a jar with a torch in it. It doesn't make any sense. But I guess God was just testing their obedience. And, they smashed them, and the people actually kind of killed themselves and then fled. So that's an amazing story. And if you wanted to make up a story, like fake stories, if you're going to make up a biblical story and you'd be like, oh, this is my encounter with God, this is what God said, you would not make up this story. This story doesn't make any sense at all. You would make up something a little more realistic, right? Why would you pick something this ridiculous that no one would ever believe? But maybe that's the point God was making. When you do something like this for people that is so outlandish, it would never happen by human means. Impossible. You can't ask any soldier who's fighting with nothing but weapons from this time period. Swords, fire, shield, bows and arrows, stuff like that. Slings. you're not going to win this war. It's impossible. I'm impressed. He even convinced 300 people to go with him, or 299. Can you imagine that? You signing up for that? These people have been kicking your butts for how long now? Like 7 years? Taking all your stuff, killing you? And there's 135,000 of them. And you're going to roll up in there with 300 people with a trumpet and a jar and a torch. And your game plan from this guy that you don't know, the least of his family, the least of the tribes, his game plan is that you're going to run up there and you're going to smash these, and I'm going to blow the trumpet, and you're going to run around putting on a little musical for these people. And somehow that's going to win. But they believed it, this 300. And they did. And they won. And that's an amazing story. That's an amazing biblical God story. Like I said, if you wanted to fake it, this isn't the story you would pick. You'd maybe say there was 135,000 of them against like 80,000, something like that. And that you could maybe see, how if they were really amped up and they had great strategery and great like sword skills, they could do it. But that's probably exactly why God told them, you got to send those people home. Right? You got 32,000. What do you say to him? It's like, no, you need to let 22 of these 1,000 people go. They need to go home. Because, and he even told them, he said, if I let you roll in there with 32,000 people, you'll think it was because of you. You'll say it was because of your military might. Exactly. My own hand has saved me. So that's why he didn't do it. People who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into your hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself, saying my own hands have saved me. So that's why. Showed up with 32,000 guaranteed to die. That's not enough people to get the job done anyway. And he sent home 22,000 of them initially. Then another 10,000. Till you're down to 300 men, which is organized suicide. That is walking into suicide. But that's exactly why God did it. Because when that story is told, there's absolutely no way it could have happened without God allowing it to happen and helping you. Without God's help, the way that story goes, you go in there, you blow the trumpet, right? You smash the vase and the torch, and then you get absolutely destroyed by 135,000 soldiers because you just broke into their camp. They're going to string you up, do horrible things to you, steal all your stuff after they kill you, and then probably go back and kill your village just for even trying that stupid attempt. Because they were not only putting their own bodies at risk, that's essentially a threat on them, which, if you know anything about the military, when someone attacks you like that, what are you going to do? You're going to respond with overwhelming force. So as soon as that failed attempt happened, they were probably going to go right back to the camp where they came from and kill all the people in there and take the virgins. And that's pretty much it. They'll steal all the stuff of value. They'll steal the virgins, maybe take the animals, and that's it. And they'll kill everybody else. And maybe even move into your town. So that's why it happened like that. Because there's no way in the world 300 people could take on 135,000. It is impossible. 32,000 against 135. You still would have lost. But God made it a point to whittle them down to 300 so that whenever people were telling this story later on, they would know that without God, that is absolutely impossible. And if you wanted to fake a story, you wouldn't make one this ridiculous. Because if you tried to sell this story, no one would buy it. You try to make this movie, no one's going to make it. Because they'll be like, no one's going to believe this. It doesn't make any sense. But that's why they did it that way. Is exactly why. Because it doesn't make sense. And a story that crazy will be told by people for the rest of their lives to everyone they know. And will be written down so that other people can learn from that story later on about trusting God and, defeating evil, and Gideon's grappling with the angel of the Lord, like trying to determine if this is the angel of the Lord or this is God's messenger, and what's he telling us to do, and should we trust him? And then even Gideon doesn't trust him entirely, and he still tests him again, but eventually gets the job done. It's an amazing story. There's a lot more to it. I won't cover it now because I'll have to go through it and prep for it. And we're getting a little short. I don't want to tie up all your time. But yeah, it's a pretty amazing story. So if you haven't read that one, it's in Judges. Go check it out. And then you can see what happens to his son and what happens to Gideon when he makes his little religious symbol, whatever it is, with the jewels in it. So I might do that one later on. We'll see. But that's it for now. I just kind of felt led to talk about this one, at least this portion of the story. So pretty amazing. It's very strange how God works. It's very strange who God picks to bring the messages to people. But if the stories weren't crazy and ridiculous, nobody would talk about them. If it was like a normal story, like 135,000 went up against like 50,000, 70,000, still pretty much an unwinnable war with that technology. But still, you'd have people sit back and go, yeah, well, they were really tough and strong, and they were really good with their sword work and their bows and arrows, and, somehow they did it. But with a story like this, 300 people with trumpets and little vases and torches, smashing them and blowing the trumpets all over the place. With a story like that, people will tell that story for the rest of their lives. They will tell their children, they will tell their friends, their relatives. They will basically not run into anyone for the rest of their lives without telling that story because of how crazy it is. It doesn't make sense. That is not a human story. That is a supernatural God story. That is a story of divine interacting with humanity, right? Divinity and humanity like interacting in a story format to do something miraculous and so outlandish that people would talk about it for the rest of their lives. And that's how a lot of these stories got told. That's how they got carried on and written down later, of course. But a story like this, if something like this happened, you would never stop telling the story. You would tell this story to anyone you met. You'd probably tell the story again once a year. Like you gather your family up and tell them, like, this story, the Israelites would never forget. Nobody would if it happened. So, very interesting how God works and who God chooses and how God chooses to like lay these stories out over time. But they're amazing stories, and they're so outlandish and wild that you can't help but tell these stories again. Because without God, they're impossible. They're God stories. So that's it for today. So just remember, God loves us, even though we're absolutely rebellious and we don't listen to God's commandments a lot of the time, and we kind of go our own way, and we pay the price for it. So God teaches tough lessons, and they're painful, and they're lessons you don't forget. So the best thing we can do is live in compliance with our Creator and play by the rules. Play by the rules and you win. That's it. Have a great day.